Christmas in New York should mean twinkling lights at Rockefeller Center and carolers on street corners. But in 1961, Alan Barron gave us something else entirely. A hitman stalking his prey through the holiday season, while a voice from nowhere tells him he was born with hate and anger built in. This is Blast of Silence, the strangest Christmas noir you've never seen, and the story behind the camera is every bit as wild as what ended up on screen. The Errol-Fylnn connection. Before Alan Barron made Blast of Silence, he nearly died in Cuba. The year was 1959, right after Castro took power, and Barron was working on what would become Errol-Flynn's final film, a bargain basement disaster called Cuban Rebel Girls. During the shoot, Barron accidentally fired a shotgun and wounded a man. If that wasn't enough, he had an affair with a woman who turned out to be a Cuban gangster's girlfriend. Barron had to flee the country, wanted by Cuban authorities for the shooting. But here's where it gets interesting. The film equipment from Cuban Rebel Girls got left behind in the chaos of the revolution. Barron struck a deal with the producers. If he could smuggle the camera equipment out of Cuba, he could use it to make his own movie. So this guy, wanted for shooting someone and sleeping with a mobster's girlfriend, snuck back into Cuba to steal film equipment. The camera that captured Blast of Silence was literally smuggled out of revolutionary Cuba by a fugitive. The $20 apartment. When Barron returned to New York to make his movie, he was living in a $20 a month cold water flat. Not $20 a week, $20 for the entire month. That's about $185 in today's money for a place with no hot water. Barron was scraping by as a taxi driver and comic book artist, drawing for publishers to make rent. This wasn't some trust fund kid playing at being an independent filmmaker. This was a high school dropout who'd lost his father at age 11, worked on the atomic bomb at 16 without knowing it, and was now betting everything on one long shot. Peter Falk said no. The role of Franky Bono was written for Peter Falk. Barron and Falk were friends from summer stock theater, and they'd hang out at Downey's bar on 8th Avenue with other off-Broadway actors. Barron offered Falk the lead role for no pay, just the chance to be in a movie. Falk seriously considered it, but then he got offered a few dollars a week and a bag of peanuts to play Kid Twist Relis in Murder, Incorporated. Falk took the paying gig, and that role launched his entire film career. So Barron had to play Franky Bono himself, using his own screen test footage in the final film. Think about that timing. If Falk had said yes, we wouldn't have Columbo. And Barron, with his gas pipe voice and Robert De Niro intensity 15 years before De Niro hit it big, ended up creating one of the most unsettling anti-heroes in noir history, precisely because he didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a real killer. The steak dinner that saved the movie. Barron shot the ending first, the death scene out in Jamaica Bay. He did his own stunts, which meant he personally fell into the freezing water and lay there playing dead while the camera rolled. They waited 10 days for the weather to turn cold, gray, and stormy, burning through the last of their raw film stock. That night, exhausted and soaking wet, Barron went to Downey's restaurant for a steak dinner to recover. By pure chance, he ended up explaining what he'd been doing to some men at the bar. They asked to see the footage. Those men were Alfred Crown and Dan Enright. Crown would later produce Frank Perry's Last Summer and Milos Forman's Taking Off. Enright was the notorious producer at the center of the quiz show scandals. He'd rigged 21 and destroyed Charles Van Doren's reputation just 3 years earlier. Enright was basically blacklisted from the industry at that point. But these two outcasts, the scandal-tainted producer and the nobody filmmaker, saw something in each other. They offered Barron $18,000 to finish the film. One steak dinner changed everything. Hurricane Donna wasn't special effects. That bleak, windswept ending wasn't Hollywood magic. Barron shot the climax during Hurricane Donna in September 1960, the only hurricane of the 20th century to batter the entire East Coast from Florida to Maine. The snow, the wind, the waves crashing, all real. Barron did his own death stunt, tumbling into Jamaica Bay's frigid water while a genuine hurricane raged around him. No stunt double, no safety crew, just a filmmaker willing to risk hypothermia for the shot. And he chose that location for a darker reason. Jamaica Bay, specifically the Old Mill area, was rumored to be a dumping ground for mob hits. Barron had heard the story since he was a kid skipping school to hang out there. Bodies supposedly ended up in those waters, so when Franky Bono meets his end in that desolate spot, Barron was filming at what locals believed was an actual mob graveyard. The isolation meant they could shoot all day without permits. The irony is perfect. A movie about a professional killer dies at the spot where real killers disposed of their victims. The Blacklisted Voice of God. That gravelly voice narrating Franky's every move belongs to Lionel Stander, and his name doesn't appear in the credits. Stander was blacklisted after refusing to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. His voice still had cachet, though. He offered Barron a deal, $1,000 with credit or $500 without credit. Barron, broke as always, took the $500 option. Stander's voice would later become famous, introducing Heart to Heart on television, but in 1961, he was doing noir narration for half price. The narration itself was written by another blacklisted talent, Waldo Salt, using the pseudonym Mel Davenport. Salt would eventually win Oscars for Midnight Cowboy and Coming Home, but in 1961, he was still persona non grata, writing under a fake name. The whole movie was made by people Hollywood had thrown away. Barron, the high school dropout. Stander and Salt, blacklisted for their politics. Even the financier Dan Enright was damaged goods after the quiz show scandals. Blast of silence is what happens when the outcasts make art together. The guerrilla filmmaking playbook. Barron shot the entire movie without permits. 22 days of filming over 4 months. All of it guerrilla style on the streets of New York. Only one location was a set, Laurie's apartment, mocked up in an abandoned firehouse on West 45th Street. Everything else was stolen shots in real locations. The crew had to bribe cops with their lunch money. They shot while letting tenants pass through hallways. Once, NYPD officers stopped them, suspecting they were conducting surveillance on the police department itself. On the very first day of shooting, their tripod toppled over and the camera crashed to the ground. Barron kept going. They filmed on a barge in the East River while a watchman threatened to have them arrested for trespassing. Barron kept going. The raw film stock came from short ends, leftover pieces that studios sold at a discount rather than throw away. Barron kept going. This is what $2,800 borrowed equipment and pure stubbornness can buy you. Big Ralph's Squalid Kingdom. Larry Tucker played Big Ralph, the slovenly gun dealer with pet rats. Tucker would later co-write Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice and help develop the Monkees TV series. But in Blast of Silence, he's this repulsive, greasy figure living in squalor with sewer rats crawling around his filthy apartment. Barron's dark vision of Christmas is everywhere in that scene. Even in Ralph's grimy room, there's a small Christmas tree, a twisted reminder of the holiday season. The scene where Ralph dies is one of the most violent in American cinema of that era. Franky strangles him with an electrical cord after a brutal fight. It echoes the famous strangling scene in Touch of Evil. And like that film, it reminds you that Christmas in noir is never about peace on earth. Tucker was brilliant in the role, playing Ralph as both pathetic and predatory, constantly touching Franky with his greasy fingers, while Franky tries to keep his cool because he needs that silencer. Barron had to shoot at himself. In the climactic shootout, Franky Bono is gunned down by mob hitmen. But Barron couldn't afford extra actors for all the shooters. So in some shots, Alan Barron is literally playing one of the gunmen chasing himself. The director-writer-star had to double as his own assassin because there was no money for more cast members. It adds this bizarre layer of existential futility to the ending. Franky Bono is literally being killed by his own creator, and in some shots by himself. The mistaken French New Wave connection. For decades, critics assumed Blast of Silence was influenced by French New Wave films like Breathless. The visual style, the existential lone wolf protagonist, the documentary-like street photography. It all screams Godard, right? Problem is, Barron shot Blast of Silence from late 1959 through January 1960. He never saw Breathless before making his film. He couldn't have. What really influenced Barron was his background as a comic book artist. He understood visual composition from drawing panels, the stark black and white cinematography, those long takes of Franky walking entire city blocks toward the camera. That's an illustrator's eye, not a cinephile copying the French. Barron created something that looked ahead to the new Hollywood of the 70s while his contemporaries were still making studio pictures. Mean Streets and Taxi Driver owe more to Blast of Silence than people realize. Scorsese definitely saw this movie. The unusual second-person narration. Film noir is famous for voiceover narration, but it's almost always first-person. The character telling their own story. Blast of Silence does something different and deeply unsettling. The narration is in second person. An outside voice talks to Franky as you, your mission, your loneliness, your hatred. It's like Franky's conscience or the voice of fate itself, commenting on his life while he lives it. Waldo Salt added this narration after the film was completed to help tie the sparse story together. Barron's original cut was essentially a silent film with natural sound. The narration transformed it into something more, a meditation on alienation and violence. Some critics at the time thought it was too flowery, too tough guy pulp. But that's exactly what makes it work. Lionel Stander's gravel voice turning Salt's hard-boiled poetry into an existential nightmare. No other noir sounds like this. Universal bought it for $50,000. Barron and producer Merrill Brody sold the permanent rights to Universal for $50,000. Later reports cite $60,000. Either way, they both admitted it was a terrible deal. Brody predicted the film would gross over $500,000, and he was probably right. Universal distributed it as a second feature in the summer of 1961, opening it in Chicago paired with another forgotten film called Trouble in the Sky. The New York premiere didn't happen until December 29, 1961, right back in the Christmas season where the story takes place. Critics were divided. The New York Times called it awkward and pretentious, but praised the location photography. Photoplay complained about the narration style. It wasn't until 1990 at the Munich Film Festival that Blast of Silence was rediscovered and hailed as a lost masterpiece. For 3 decades, it was invisible. The atomic bomb connection. Here's something Barron probably didn't fully understand at the time. At age 16, he dropped out of high school and got a job with the War Department. He was told he was doing assembly work. Years later, he learned he'd been working on the atomic bomb, a high school dropout from Brooklyn, helping build the weapon that would end World War II and define the Cold War. Then at 17, he joined the Navy for the final months of the war. By 19, he was at the School of Visual Arts trying to become an illustrator. This trajectory, from atomic bomb assembly line to noir filmmaker, explains a lot about Barron's worldview. He'd seen how destructive humanity could be. Franky Bono, born with hate and anger built in, makes perfect sense as a character when you know Barron's background. The Criterion Resurrection. In 2008, Criterion Collection released Blast of Silence on DVD, giving it the full prestige treatment. A new digital transfer in both 1.85 widescreen and 1.33 full frame, a making-of documentary called Requiem for a Killer, on-set Polaroids, and a comparison of locations as they existed in 2008. Terrence Rafferty wrote the essay. Sean Phillips created a graphic novel adaptation. This is when Barron, in his 80s, finally got his due. The film that Universal had dumped as a second feature was now sitting next to Seven Samurai and The Third Man in the Criterion catalog. Not bad for a movie shot without permits by a guy living in a cold water flat. Born in pain, died in silence. The opening line of Blast of Silence defines everything that follows. Remembering, out of the black silence you were born in pain, born with hate and anger built in. Took a slap on the backside to blast out the scream. The film literalizes its own title. We see Franky emerge from a train tunnel like a birth canal, blasted from darkness into Penn Station at Christmas. And at the end, he returns to silence, dying alone in the water without even getting to scream. It's the bleakest Christmas movie ever made, and probably the most honest film about what it costs to be a professional killer. No glamour, no wisecracks, just loneliness and self-destruction. The business of murder, as the narration reminds us, goes on. But Blast of Silence stands alone. 77 minutes of pure alienation wrapped in a Christmas bow. Blast of Silence proves that great films can come from anywhere, even from a high school dropout with stolen equipment and a $20 apartment. Alan Barron made his masterpiece and disappeared into television work. The film itself disappeared for 3 decades. But now we can see what he accomplished. A Christmas noir that feels more modern than movies made 50 years later. Which classic noir should we cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments. Hit subscribe if you want more strange histories from the dark side of Hollywood. And if you've never seen Blast of Silence, the Criterion edition is waiting for you. Fair warning though, this isn't It's a Wonderful Life. This is It's a Brutal Life. And Franky Bono never stood a chance.